Welcome to the Israel Insider Weekly Podcast, where we talk about the news in Israel with Ron Cantor, president of Shalanu TV and Israel Regional Director for God TV. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us today. Well, Ron, as always, another busy week there in Israel with the news. Let's start with, though, a bit of unfortunate controversy. An evangelist by the name of Mike Evans sent a letter to Prime Minister designate Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. Will you share? I know you wrote a little something on Facebook in response. How about just let our listeners know a little bit what's happening with that?
Yeah, this is it's a little sensitive. I don't really enjoy speaking about another minister. I've known of Mike Evans since I was a brand new believer. And he does come from a Jewish background. His mother apparently was an Orthodox Jew, and then I've met him a few years ago. He has an amazing museum here in Israel called the Friends of Zion Museum. We go there. We'll continue to go there. It is an incredible museum that talks about or shows how Gentile believers have befriended the Jewish people throughout the centuries and the impact that has had. It's a tear jerker of a museum, one of the best in the whole country. So he's done a lot of good work. But what he did this week was just bizarre. He started by writing a letter to Naftali Bennett, who is going to be, outside of something bizarre happening. He's going to be our prime minister on Sunday, rather. Sunday over here in Israel is the first day of the week, and so that would be like Monday in most other nations. And so he'll be sworn in on Sunday, and he wrote him a very, very aggressive letter. And I'm just going to bring up a brief quote, and if my email client makes noises, I apologize. I typically close it down before we do this. But he attacked him aggressively and in language that is unbecoming of a minister of the gospel. Shocking, really.
Yeah.
Let me I'll read a little brief. Again, this is a minister of the gospel, a Zionist who has done quite a bit to promote Christian Zionism, encouraging believers to stand with Israel. But he has a great relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And that seems to have, it seems that his loyalty to the state of Israel is, he's confusing that with Netanyahu, the person. And he feels that without Netanyahu leading the country, that we're lost. Just to be clear, Naftali Bennett, though his coalition is made up of people from all over the political scene, he himself is to the right of Netanyahu. He is not a left winger.
Right. Well, interesting.
And he is a Zionist. He wants to settle the West Bank, wants to annex the West Bank, make it part of Israel.
Wow.
So here's some of what he wrote. Quote, "What a disgusting disappointment you turned out to be. Shame, shame, shame on you. Don't ever call yourself a defender of Zion. You're not. You're a pathetic, bitter little man, so obsessed on murdering Netanyahu that you're willing to damage the state of Israel for your worthless cause."
Wow.
It gets worse.
Wow.
"I assure you, I will fight you every step of the way." I don't even understand. I'm reading this. It's hard to continue. It's like, why would you say this to a Zionist leader if he was a left-leaning leader of Israel? You're supporting Israel.
Right.
You're supporting the fact that God brought the Jewish people back from all the nations of the world and raised up Israel according to prophecy. It's not about a particular personality. Okay. He said, "You have lost the support of evangelicals 100%. Now, that's ridiculous because Mike Evans does not speak for evangelicals. We'll get more into that in a minute. "We gave you 4 years of miracles under Donald Trump, and this is how you show your appreciation, blanking," and he spelled out a very crude word, "blanking on our face. Now, again, this is a minister of the gospel writing profanity to the incoming prime minister of Israel. It's just shocking.
Yeah.
How dare you? You care more about your own, again, another word that I can't say, blank ego and your bitterness than you do the state of Israel. Now, let me just talk about the truth of that. That's ridiculous. First of all, Naftali Bennett, by all accounts, loves Israel. He served in an elite unit, the same one that Bibi served in the army. He loves Israel. He is part of a Zionist party, a right-wing party to the right of Netanyahu's Likud party. But Mike Evans seems to think, and he came out the next day in a press conference and kind of doubled down, which was in Jerusalem. He flew into Jerusalem, and he doubled down that, this country can't survive without Benjamin Netanyahu. And that he also kind of said that it's going to be turned around before Sunday, that he had been meeting all day with Knesset members, and he said there are 4 of them that want to vote against the government, but they're scared they don't want to be the first. And I assume that means they don't want to be blamed for the downfall of the first stable or potentially stable government after 4 elections. And it would send us into a 5th election. I could understand not wanting to be that person. And he said that all 4 of these are waiting for someone else to be the first, and then they'll jump in. Now, what's interesting is as soon as that came out, within 24 hours, the main Knesset member who was publicly considering voting against it, he's part of Naftali Bennett's Yamina party, Nir Orbach, he came out with a very strong statement that he's going to vote for the government, that it's the right thing to do for Israel, and that the religious right no longer represents him because they've gone way too far. And he didn't use the word racism, but that might be the right word. They've left him. And he's still who he is. He says, but you guys have moved to a place that I don't even recognize you. Those are my words. Now, Lisa, Mike Evans in this statement says that evangelicals that he's lost, Naftali Bennett has lost the support of evangelicals 100%. That is a bizarre comment, since Mike Evans doesn't have a congregation that I know of. He did say in his speech that his son leads the largest church in the world, as a matter of fact, which is through their Facebook page that was shut down. But as far as I can tell, that's not a church. And it's a sad situation, but he doesn't, Johnny Moore, who does represent a lot of evangelicals, came out and distanced himself from that. God TV, we put out a statement saying that, we have not heard from any of our constituents who are evangelical saying that they would not support Israel if Netanyahu was not prime minister. It's a bizarre thing that happened, and it came out of his friendship with Bibi, but he did 3 things. He wrote this letter, then he wrote another op-ed in the Times of Israel, which was a rambling, poetic mess that bordered on anti-Semitism, depending on how you read it. Basically, seemed to say that if we get rid of Bibi, it's like going into a second Holocaust. It was weird. And then the third thing he did was this press conference on Monday, which was not good. People can watch it. It's online. Yeah. He was yelling. He was screaming. I'm sorry.
I just was saying it. I was thinking, I watched it too on YouTube, and it's painful. And I think overall with this, I've thought about it that, it's just a good opportunity for each person to just really think about, do we stand with Israel or do we stand with personalities? Right. It's like, what is it that God has called us to? And, what
and when you talk about what God has called us to, it's to be a witness to the Jewish people through love and compassion. What he did at this news conference.
Yeah.
And this is why we're addressing it, because I want Jewish unbelievers to understand that doesn't represent Christianity at all.
Right.
If you watch the end of this news conference, he is incredibly rude to Israeli reporters. You're saying you love Israel and you're not for the right or for the left, but you are rude to people who ask you questions that you don't want to answer. And one of the main questions was he was saying that it was wrong of Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid to bring in this Arab party. By the way, Arabs live in Israel. They're 20% of our nation. I think it's a positive thing to have Arabs in our government, as long as they're coming in for the right reason.
Right.
And one of the reporters said, well, you do know that Netanyahu was negotiating with the exact same Arab party to bring them in his government had he been able to put a coalition together, but he wasn't able to.
Right.
And he said, quote, I'm not going to answer that question next. It was
wow.
It was strange to watch. It was embarrassing for me. I mean, for those of us who live here and we're fighting this battle to present Yeshua to our people. It was just a poor witness. And I hope in time that there are people that can reach out to Mike Evans and that he can repent. And by the way, he did apologize to Naftali Bennett, but then he went on to attack him just as vicious, in my opinion, in the news conference. He apologized for saying that he wasn't a Zionist and that he used some bad language in his letter. But who's, you know, I have a bunch of people look at my letters before I send them out if it's controversial. But, you know, there's a segment in the kingdom, and this brings us a whole nother issue of accountability. There are so many ministers out there, Lisa, who don't have any accountability. And I don't know about Mike Evans. I don't know about his accountability, but it would seem to me that he did. I would have to guess that nobody read that letter before he sent it.
Yeah.
Because anybody who loves Mike Evans would say, Brother Mike, please don't send this. It's not going to turn out good for you.
Right.
And then to show up here and lecturing the Israeli media, it's not, as Dan Juster wrote, let's see if I can find that quote from Dan. Just one second. I don't have it here, but pretty much he said that that's not the place for the clergy to be coming into a country that's not your own and taking sides in a political battle. That is beneath the calling of those of us who are called to preach the good news of Yeshua.
Yeah.
And like I said to you, Lisa, before we started, I didn't want to spend too much time on this. So let's move on. You know what? Let me just say this. I want to encourage everyone to pray for Mike Evans because you know, he shared his story to the Israeli media, and he had a horrific upbringing. His mother was an Orthodox Jew, and his father was an alcoholic abuser and an anti-Semite. And that's kind of what led him to love the Jewish people, but he was horribly abused. So even though he's 73, you know, and I'm sure he's been through whatever counseling, whatever, pray for Mike Evans.
Yeah.
He hasn't had an easy go of it, particularly as a child.
Yeah, that's good. We'll pray. And we'll move on to the next thing, which is, I think, you know, a very big pivotal moment potentially for Israel, which is this Sunday, the new government, the unity government. We talked about it last week, and I had the funny picture that it was kind of like Yair Lapid had a wheelbarrow full of all sorts of groups, and he was pressing toward a finish line, which would actually be a start line for the government. And so it looks like they have made it through this week. At least it's right now when we're recording this, it's Thursday. So just a couple more days. And so hopefully on Sunday, there'll be a new government in Israel. Talk to us a little bit about that and what it's been like over there this week in that regard.
Well, the wheelbarrow analogy is apropos. And I was actually thinking of, you know, in end of the year school things we did as kids, there was one race where you would have to take an egg and put it on a spoon and then you'd run. Well, imagine Yair Lapid has to do that race, but he's got eight eggs in his spoon.
And those all are on top of each other. Yeah.
Right. And those are the 8 parties that he's trying to form a government with. So yeah, that amazingly, it looks like it's going to hold, and there will be a new government on Sunday. Even one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's top lieutenants, Miki Zohar, said there are no more tricks.
Wow.
And they've tried everything. I mean, the language
I think I heard something like the tricks and shticks of Netanyahu this week, but that none of them have worked so far. And but go ahead. There was something that.
Well, I mean, he just said that, you know, they're as far as he's concerned, that there's nothing they have left, and they've tried everything, and the language has been, in my opinion, very dangerous. I remember before I was a citizen of Israel, over, I guess, 25 years ago, 27 years ago, when Rabin was killed, Prime Minister Rabin, it was similar. The environment where the left and right was just so um, vitriolic in their speech against each other. Now here it's different. It's the right against the new right, if you will. There is no left wing in Israel. There is, it's tiny. I think I've mentioned 12 seats out of 120. 10% of the Knesset is left wing. Most of the Knesset is, by all accounts, either right wing or center right. And so the anger isn't really against right against left. It's against Netanyahu loyalists and the Orthodox together against the new right, if you will, and the centrist. And they're calling people evil. So that one Likud minister referred to Lapid and Naftali Bennett as suicide bombers.
Wow.
And the sad part is they're planting seeds that in the mind of the mentally unstable or fanatical could turn into, crimes of passion against a political person. And it's really, in my opinion, incredibly irresponsible. And it's what happens when you have somebody like Bibi Netanyahu who's losing power, and he is panicking. He's doing whatever he can to not lose power. And he even toyed with resigning and trying to become president, which is a different position. I think that would have been a disaster because he would have had to serve Naftali Bennett, and that just would not have worked. The president it's a statesman role. It's an ambassadorial role. It doesn't really fit, the missile lobbing Benjamin Netanyahu, who's a fighter for good. I've loved him over the years. He's done some amazing things for the state of Israel, but being the congenial president is not really for him. One of the things, Lisa, that particularly bothered me is, the one of the ultra religious parties said that no, it wasn't actually. It was a guy named David Absalom, who actually was instrumental in shutting down Shalanu a year ago when he was the communications minister. He said that the Ram Party leader, Mansour Abbas, will be calling up Bennett and Lapid, or rather, they'll be calling him up every day to see how he's doing, to check his temperature, see if he wants a massage, if they can send him. In other words, they'll be doing whatever they have to do to appease him so he doesn't leave the government and send it crashing down, going to new elections. The ironic thing is that it's exactly what Likud has done to the ultra-Orthodox for the past 12 years, with the exception of the first few, I think 2 years, where the Orthodox were out of the government. Because the Orthodox are not ideological. They don't care what as long as you give them money, they will vote for you, whatever. And there's a word for that I'm not going to use. But that's what Likud has done. They have formed their governments with their own big party, and then they've a couple right-wing parties and the Orthodox. And if the Orthodox ever left their coalition, and that's why we have not been able to pass a law, or rather implement the law that was already passed, I think, for the Orthodox young men to go in the army like every other young man in Israel. That's a crime, in my opinion, that you would have a segment of the society that has blackmailed the government where they don't fight in the army. We've got our sons risking their lives in Gaza and in the West Bank, and these guys saying, no, we have to study Torah. The Bible says if you don't work, you're worse than an infidel. And many of these people, they live on donations and they study. They don't do the army, and they don't. That law, by the way, was initially passed early on in the state of Israel, and it said there would be a small number of scholars who would be exempt from the army because they're scholars, and that they're going to give. That's fine, but that small number, which was supposed to be around 100. Became every ultra-Orthodox young man or young woman that didn't want to serve, which is the vast majority.
Yeah.
So they're panicking too, by the way, because this is going to be a government without them. and they're going to implement these laws that that would compel most of their young men to serve in the army.
And also, right, to address situations like the ones that led to the stampede and disaster at Mount
Yes.
Merom a
Yes.
few weeks back, and then another one like a couple weeks later that where some risers collapsed, and another.
Yeah, you have to understand that this community, they're part of Israel, but they're not really part of Israel.
They kind of live unto themselves, right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
they have their own councils, and they would, if they could, they would live by their own laws and ignore the state of Israel. Many of them are anti-Israel. They're not Zionists. They think that the country is a sham, and their attitudes towards secular Israelis is extremely aggressive, in the worst way.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a situation we find ourselves in. But they've been in the government. They've been in every government since the state was established, except for a very few. And if this government lasts for 5 years, I don't know that it will. It's only 61 seats. It just takes one person to get offended and defect. That would bring the entire government down. We'll have to see what happens. But if it lasts for the 4.5, 5 years that it's supposed to, there's going to be some real changes in the way the country relates to the ultra Orthodox. And the person leading that charge is Avigdor Lieberman, who is going to be he's our incoming treasurer. And he has said that there is going to be no opportunity, even later down the road, for the ultra Orthodox to enter the government. Here's what could happen, Lisa, is if I don't know, I don't know how much Netanyahu's going to enjoy being the leader of the opposition. I mean, he's used to being in charge. He's used to being the man. He's on the his name is as well known as Putin, Trump, Biden. I mean, this is a big time world leader, and he's going to go become the leader. I don't see that lasting more than 6 months before he gets bored and then resigns and goes on the speaking tour. Now, when that happens, once he resigns, it could be that the Likud come into the government, which would add 30 seats and make it a very stable government. Now, maybe they will do that. Maybe they won't do that. I don't know that they would, because they would not have the prime minister seat, which you would want them to have as the largest government, the largest party. You know what? I am not going to try to predict the future of the Israeli politics, but I will say this. What's going to happen Sunday with this change government coming in? It's personally, I'm for it. It is not a left-wing government. Anyone who says that is absolutely lying. That's fear-mongering. It has 3 right-wing parties, 2 centrist parties, and 2 very small left-wing parties, and then an Arab party. If anything, it is a right-wing government with some left-wing folks inside it. Now, you might be wondering, why would left-wing people get inside the government? It is simply because they want to move on from Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, they're united, it seems, in their hatred, or that may be too strong, but certainly they don't. They want him gone. And
it's not too strong of a word. I don't like it, and I certainly don't hate him. But I do think that there comes a point, a leader who has been the premier for 12 years starts to view himself as royalty, and starts to view the country as something that he owns, his own little business. And his own son, Yair Netanyahu, who is famous for making just bizarre, egregious comments on social media, was just suspended from Twitter for 2 days because he gave out, I believe, the address of someone in the New Hope Party and told people to go demonstrate there. I may have the facts a little bit wrong. That's basically what happened. And again, this is a young man who should be embarking on a career, but he fashions himself more as a Donald Trump Jr. than, the difference, of course, is that Donald Trump Jr. actually owns a significant business, enterprise, whereas Yair Netanyahu doesn't. As far as I don't even know if he has a job. He may. I don't want to go on record and say that he doesn't, but he's known for his social media outburst.
Well, we have a lot to watch out then for in the next few weeks, and we'll see how it goes. I'm just eager to see if they make it across the finish line on Sunday.
It's
And then
never a dull moment.
it's
Never a dull
true,
moment.
and I really appreciate, I'm sure the listeners do as well, Ron, hearing so much of this are pieces that we don't necessarily grasp from here, to understand how all these parts, because I think one thing I've definitely learned over the last few months, especially, is just seeing how Israel's government is made up of so many different parts. Like somebody along the way said that this was like the new 12 tribes of Israel, not exactly like that, but that was their quote, was that it was like, these are the new tribes. And so to understand how all these tribes fit together, how they can work together. Personally, for as long as I've been following Israel news, I've only known Benjamin Netanyahu as the prime minister. That's the only prime minister I've ever, known. Right. And certainly his personality has been great, and the things he's done, have been great. But I'm also really eager, though, to see, because, God is definitely, he is the one who, he's sovereign over all of these matters in men's hands. And so anyway, to see what's next, just like here in America, we had a change of government. Sounds like in Israel, y'all are about to have a change of government, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember back in September, and I don't, or late August rather, I wasn't praying, or I wasn't asking God about the election. And when you have experiences with the Lord, the hardest part is to explain them in English or Hebrew for that matter, because they're otherworldly. They're you just don't. There's no words to explain heavenly concepts. But I was driving down the road again. I consider myself part of the Israeli right. I'm certainly not a left-winger by anybody who knows me, but I was driving to a meeting, and I heard the Lord say to me, I'm moving on from Benjamin Netanyahu. He has begun to put his own affairs and his family ahead the affairs of the state, and the interests of the state. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, that was you, wasn't it, Lord? Yeah. And I remember writing it down. I told a few people initially, and then in November I wrote to about 8 or 9 leader friends of mine and shared that with them, and then we shared it publicly in April when I was preaching in Mississippi, and and as I've watched it after I shared that again, I'm not rooting for anything. I'm rooting for God. That is, and I would be happy to be wrong. I just want God to be glorified. That's my passion. But and then it looked like it was going to, even back in April when I shared it, there was no, it still didn't look like it was going to actually, it looked like they would probably go to a 5th election, if I remember correctly. And then it looked like Yair Lapid was going to stitch together a coalition. And then it all fell apart during the war. And I thought, I remember thinking, well, oh gosh, I shared that publicly, and I was actually contemplating, okay, how do I apologize? Do I have to repent? Do I have to, it was very different than the American elections because there was so much passion involved. And of course, in Israel, there wasn't 5 million prophets saying, that Bibi was going to win like in America with Trump. So nevertheless, I was willing to take responsibility, but here we are now 3 days out, and it looks like it might just happen that Yair Lapid, and by the way, I have a lot of respect for Yair Lapid, not necessarily because I agree with him politically, as I believe he's a man of integrity. When he came into the government over 12 years ago, he said he wants a smaller government, because once you put together a coalition, then you have to start appeasing everybody's egos by giving them portfolios. You're going to be minister of this. You're going to you build your cabinet, and it got to astronomical sizes of like 36, 40 seats. And he said his government would only be like 20, 21 seats. He wants to be responsible with the finances of Israel. And so if you look at somebody wrote, I think today in the Times of Israel, that, if you look at the partnership between Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, and then you look at the partnership a year ago between Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, it's completely different.
Mm-hmm.
One is based on hatred and mistrust, and it didn't work. And this one seems to be based on integrity and trust. And we will see. A lot can happen. We're recording this on Thursday night. A lot can happen between now and Sunday.
Yes, it's true. I've definitely learned that. And one last thing with that, I just, again, from like an outsider looking in, it appears to me, I marvel that Yair Lapid, the man who, got the nod to form the government, he is, I would say, taking a humble position and having Naftali Bennett go first. And
that was actually that's where I started. I'm glad you reminded me of that. That's what I was starting to say, and I got off on the wrong direction. He's not going to be prime minister. Now, to be clear, if he was going to be prime minister first, there'd be no government. That was the condition to get. I mean, Naftali Bennett's paying a huge price politically to do this. So he asked for a huge, exchange.
He had a big ask.
Right. And so he will be prime minister first. But still, it takes incredible humility on Yair Lapid's part. And maybe I'm naive. I tend to be naive when it comes to politics. I tend to believe people when they tell me things. We'll see what happens. But right now, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Alrighty. Well, we'll stay tuned and see how it is next week when we talk about this.
Right.
So one final story we'd like to cover for our listeners is about tourism, which I think is something everybody will be excited about. I know you and Alana are. So what it looks like is that Israel has started, as we've reported before, has started to open back up for tourists, but it's basically a slow trickle at this point. It is a few small groups of 20 allowed in at a time, and they had hoped that they'd really be able to open it up July 1, but it looks like it's not quite there yet. More groups are coming, and hopefully around the end of this month, they'll be announcing when more can come. So I know you've kind of got a little something going on with this for our listeners. You want to talk about that a bit? Share with them what might be up ahead?
Absolutely. I'm excited. We're putting a tour together.
Woo-hoo. Yeah.
Ilan and I would say one of our favorite things in the world to do, and I am not exaggerating. We love leading tours. And I'm going to just tell you the truth. I downplay everything. I try and downplay everything, and I try not to speak, in a haughty way. But let me just say, we put together the best tours, and we really do. And you can ask the people who come with us, and there's a few reasons. Number one, Ilana was born here. She knows all the ins and outs. There's in Hebrew, we have a couple words, protexia and combina. It's when you know somebody, and you get in. And today we were just at one of the most exciting museums in Israel. It has just gone through a $100 million renovation, and sadly there's no tourist coming in to see it. And so we were put in touch with one of the directors and the CEO, and we went and we had a private tour there today. It's beautiful. It's called the Museum of the People. It used to be called the Museum of the Diaspora, and it's all about Jewish history and where the Jews have come from and what's Israel like today. And it's interactive. It was the first museum I went to when I first came to Israel in 1991, and I loved it. I wept. I was in there for hours, and to see what they've done with it, it's just unbelievable, unbelievable. So I can't wait to. And they said, we want you to bring people here. I said, I'm gonna bring people here.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
There was one thing that had all the different foods of Israel, and they're making, and you make it. It's interactive. You literally with the person that's you had an Ethiopian person, an Ethiopian Jew, a Moroccan Jew, a Polish Jew, and you make food with them. It's
That's
really
so cool. Yeah, I want to go to that. That sounds awesome.
We're going to be going there. And of course, you also learn about how Jewish people came into the nation, 73 years ago and before then, and then how they lived in other nations all over the world. It's incredible. So we're putting together an amazing tour. It's probably going to be October, early November, somewhere around there. And again, one of the reasons they're great is that we have lived here. We're Hebrew speakers. We introduce our tour groups to Israel, not just a tourist contraption, but we get off that track and we get back on that track. And when we get off that track, it's normally to meet somebody very interesting. Could be a Holocaust survivor, could be a Messianic Jewish pastor. It could be somebody sharing a Jewish believer sharing their testimony. We just have an amazing time, and it's awesome. We laugh a lot. We eat incredible food, and we get into the Word. I love teaching the Word of God. That's my greatest ministry passion, to educate people on the Jewish roots of the faith, the history of Israel. We're learning on the bus. We're learning at Masada, Jerusalem, the Galilee, Tel Aviv. It's just absolutely amazing.
So for folks, help us to know like the size of the tour, about how many people.
Well, we cap it off typically at 50. They're normally around 35, but the bus only takes a certain amount. So, between 35 and 50. And even when we did our largest tour, which was 55, nobody felt cramped. We had the largest bus in the nation. Nobody felt like, oh, it's just too big, because it's just fun.
It still has that intimate feel. And I think too, like for folks, it sounds like it'd be just such a great opportunity. And knowing Ilana too, I can just see the wonderful part that she brings to it, just the Israeli life, that she brings to the table with this tour. And I think it just sounds like it's gonna be great. And one thing that it seems like to me, and you had mentioned before we started the broadcast, that it's basically going to be like, think about everybody, how it is if you get to go to Disney World and there's no lines, because even in the fall, it's probably not going to be wide open just yet.
Imagine you're 8 years old and your parents take you to Disney World and you get in and you find out that it's empty. Now, to be clear, it's not going to be empty. It'll probably be 60 to 70% of capacity in terms of the tourism ability of the nation. But it's going to be calm. It's going to be great. One of the things we did on the last couple tours, I hope we can do it again, is my brother-in-law is a master chef, and we took everybody down to his moshav, which is, I can't even tell you what a moshav is, but it's like a neighborhood of farms with houses, privately owned. Anyways, he makes an outdoor feast, puts a big table out, and he cooks every kind of meat you can imagine. And then he tells his story of growing up there on the Moshav in the south. Just great. We went into Sderot, which is a city that borders Gaza, and we heard from a pastor there, a Messianic Jewish pastor, who told us what they go through and their life there. It was just incredible. It was life-changing, and I'm just so sad that we haven't been able to go on a tour. It'll be 2 years if we finally get it done in October, November.
Wow.
So if folks want to go, we're again, just today I spoke with Yoav, who is the CEO of IGT Tours that we work with, and we're putting together dates. But just send an email to info@uptozion.net. info@uptozion.net, or just wait and we'll get all the information out to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, that's awesome. And stay tuned to, Israel continues to roll back the restrictions.
Yeah, let's just address that real quick. Like if you came in between now and July, you'd have to get, I can never say this word, the test where it shows if you have the antibodies. Serological, is that it? Did I say it right?
Yeah, that's right. Serological.
Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah, you got it.
So but by the time we do our tour in October, if things continue, or November, if this trend continues, there were 6 cases of coronavirus yesterday in Israel. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, for all the fanfare about the vaccine, it has definitely worked in Israel. Coronavirus is gone in this country. So in the fall, I don't know if they're still going to be doing those tests, if they're still going to be doing uh, hopefully by then you'll be able to just come right into the country. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be a special time to be one of those first groups, evangelical groups that get to come into the country, and
Yeah.
and the Israeli people are going to be so happy to have tourists back.
Yeah.
And it's good for the economy. It's good
Yeah.
for our restaurants. It's good, just good. It's right.
Yeah.
So we welcome the pilgrims.
Yeah. Something to look forward to. That's awesome. Well, thanks, Ron, so much for all the insight and commentary. And
Yes,
that
ma'am.
that wraps it up for this episode of the Israel Insider Podcast. If you enjoyed this weekly podcast, please be sure to give it a review on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, or wherever you're listening from. That'll help others find our podcast. Be sure to follow the Israel Insider on Facebook, and there's a way from there that you can sign up for our daily email to get the inside scoop on happenings in the Holy Land. Thanks again for joining us. See you next week.